Hey guys, welcome back. So it's a beautiful day out here in LA, another beautiful day. And it's warm, so I have my cold water to keep me cool. And I'm just gonna go ahead and get right in. So this is gonna be a story time on my experience in childhood with panic disorder, how I experienced it and how I survived it. And I'm gonna talk first, we want to talk about, the prevalence. Hi, Stanley. First, we want to talk about the prevalence of panic disorder and give you guys like a working definition of what it is in case you guys are unfamiliar with it. Talking about the symptoms. We're going to talk about treatment approaches, effective treatment strategies that were effective for me when I was a child growing up, getting through this disorder. And let's just go ahead and get right in there. So, first, I have to say that I think it's interesting how in the profession, a lot of times they try to separate psychology and medicine, right? Because psychology is the study of the mind and human behavior, whereas medicine is more focused on the body and physical ailments. And another thing I think is interesting is that basically a lot of doctors, although they have exposure to psychology, that's not their main focus. That's not their expertise, you know? So a lot of times what medicine can explain, psychology is there to explain. And I'll come back and revisit that, later when I begin to tell you guys my story. But first, I have to say that a panic disorder is a type of anxiety disorder, and it is not as prevalent as generalized anxiety disorders or anxiety or depression, but it is an issue. It's an issue that's pretty prevalent within American society, and I think statistics say that 2 to 3%, 2.7% to be exact, of the U.S. population will be affected by an anxiety disorder within a 12-month span of time. So within a 12-month span of time, essentially 2.7%, nearly 3%, which basically amounts to, I think when I did the math, it was like 9 million Americans. 3% of 325 million Americans that live in the United States will be impacted by panic disorder. So I know that seems like a very small number, but that's a trick when it comes to giving statistics and in terms of percentages. Is it can be tricky, because it sounds like 3% is not really that many people, but it is when you talk about the actual numbers, like 9 million people. That's a lot of people. And I should have did this inside, but I don't know. I like outside better because it's more natural. So yeah, a lot of people are affected by this disorder. And the symptoms can be conceptualized. How I look at it is that there are psychological symptoms and then there are physical or physiological symptoms. So the psychological symptoms, the first and the most debilitating, I think, would be the feeling that you're losing control. So feeling like a loss of control. Another psychological symptom, would be feeling like you're about to die. Depersonalization, derealization, so feeling like you're like out of body experience. What else? Stanley says, how can I be able to chat with you more? Well, this is more like a psychoeducational storytime video. So I don't know. Maybe at the end of this video, I may do Q&A. So if you stick around, or, you may be able to ask me some direct questions. But I just kind of want to focus on, telling you guys the story and then giving you guys a little bit of psychoeducation in between. So, I mean, anytime you catch one of my live videos, you can probably sneak a question in there, if you want to chat with me. directly. But so the psychological symptoms would be feeling like you're losing control, feeling like you're about to die, depersonalization, this overwhelming fear of like it's a worry, like you're worried about things. That's pretty much anxiety altogether. And again, like I said, panic disorder is a form of anxiety. It's an anxiety disorder. And so those will be the main prevailing psychological symptoms. The physiological symptoms would include sweating. Speaking of, it's like I am sweating right now, but it's hot, you guys. That's why I'm sweating. I'm outside. And I kind of prefer like cold weather, so I don't like hot weather, but I've learned to adapt. So sweating would be one. Increased heart rate, chest pains, dizziness, stomach irritability, or like feeling like you have like butterflies in your stomach. I know a lot of you guys probably can relate to that when you feel nervous. Trembling of the muscles is one. And I'm trying to think, what am I missing? So we have increased heart rate, we have sweating, we have muscle trembling, we have heart pains, chest pains, dizziness, discomfort in the stomach, feeling like you have butterflies in your stomach. And I think I pretty much covered the bulk of the main physiological symptoms. So those are the main psychological and physiological symptoms that occur within panic disorder. Now, it's important to note that according to the literature actually makes a distinction between anxiety attacks and panic attacks. And then you have panic disorder. So those three terms, keep in mind: anxiety attacks, panic attacks, and panic disorders. So basically, anxiety attacks and panic attacks pretty much look the same, right? The symptoms that I just described to you, they pretty much are consistent between panic attacks and anxiety attacks. The difference that the literature notes, the main significant difference between the two, is that with panic attacks, they say it occurs like out of nowhere, like out of the blue, right? It just happens like out of nowhere. There's no precursor. There's no precipitating stressor that triggers the attack. Whereas with anxiety attacks, there is a known stressor. There is a precipitating or precursor that comes before the actual attack. So that's the main distinguishing feature according to the literature. And in order for you to be diagnosed with panic disorder, you have to meet at least four of those symptoms have to be present. So there can be psychological or physiological symptoms that I already described that must be present for you to be diagnosed with panic disorder. And after experiencing a panic attack, 1 month after that, you basically have these fears that you're going to experience another panic attack. So that's one of the key features of panic disorder. And or you avoid certain situations or stimuli that you believe would be a trigger for that panic attack. So that's how panic disorder is essentially diagnosed. So it's not that, okay, you just have one panic attack and then you have panic disorder. It has to be these reoccurring panic attacks and a fear that you're going to experience another panic attack. That is the distinguishing feature. And that's pretty much how people are given the diagnosis panic disorder. Now, like I said, although it occurs within 2 to 3% of the population, so that sounds like, a very small percentage, but it still affects nearly 9 million people within a 12-month span. So you guys can kind of get the idea of how significant this disorder is. And you're looking at a person who actually survived panic disorder. It's something that I experienced when I was very young. And the interesting thing about it is that when I was a child, we didn't know what it was. You know, no one knew at the time what it was. I was born in the early 80s, 1983. Nobody knew what it was. It's like I didn't even know. And until I got older and I started to study psychology in undergrad, what I was experiencing when I was younger. So just imagine like the fear of not knowing, how that added to the experience and the symptoms that I already was experiencing. So I have to take a deep breath because now I'm about to go back into history to tell you guys about my experience as a child and basically what it was like for me. I'm going to give you guys a kind of a peek into a few of the panic attacks that I had when I was a child growing up. It was really scary. It was debilitating. Next time I know to go inside because it's hot, y'all. That's why I miss New York City so much because I love the cold weather. I love the winters. Like me and the winters are like this. I love the cold weather, but out here it's just like, it's so freaking hot, y'all. And I chose to do this video in the heat of the day. Perfect timing. Okay. So, I remember my very first panic attack, and this was around I was in elementary school, and I would say I was around the age of 8 or 9, and that would place me 9 years old. That would place me, I would say, in the second, third grade, right? Yeah, because I was 6 years old in kindergarten, 7 years old in first grade, so that would place me around second, third grade. And yeah, I started school late because that's just the requirement of our school district that I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, that, you know, because my birthday is September 28th, I wasn't old enough to start kindergarten, even though I was very much ready. So by the time I did start kindergarten, I already knew how to tell time, I knew how to read, like I was well above everyone else. Well above the standard, let's say, you know, when it came to me starting school. But yeah, I was around about 8 or 9 years old, second, third grade, around that age when I experienced my first panic attack. And I remember when we were younger, you know, of course I grew up in a 2-parent household, my mother and my father. But during the summers, my father and my mother, they would take us to my mother's mom's house in St. Augustine, Florida, where my mom is from. And we would go there like we would alternate basically. My mom's sister, she also has kids, and so we would alternate different summers. So, you know, let's say one summer me and my sister would go to stay, you know, with my grandmother slash aunt in St. Augustine. We would spend the summers there, and then, you know, the next summer my cousins would come to stay with us, you know, in Jacksonville, Florida. So we would take turns. Me and my cousins would take turns, you know, spending the summer at each other's house. And so I remember it was during the summertime. I was staying at my aunt's house, and I was a tomboy growing up. So I loved to just hang out with the boys, and my cousins, you know, they were boys, and I would like to do boy things, play football, basketball, climb trees, you know, jump over fences. Like that was just right up my alley. And so we were outside playing, you know, and I don't remember what we were playing. I just know it was outside and it was hot, as it is always is in Florida, you know, just like California. It was hot. We were outside, and I remember my chest, like there was a tightening in my chest, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. And so, you know, I remember rushing back to my grandmother's house and letting her know, like, Grandma, I think I'm about to die. Like, I literally thought I was about to die because I felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt like my lungs were closing up and I couldn't breathe. Now, at the time, I thought it was a reaction, like allergic reaction to, let's say, poison ivy. You know, I had no clue what was happening at the time. I was just afraid for my life, and I was young, and I was just like, I'm about to die, Grandma. And I remember rushing back, and my cousins, they were afraid too. They were concerned. They rushed back with me, and I told my grandma, I was like, Grandma, I think I'm about to die. And she was like, what's going on, honey? Like down in the South, you know, it's like nothing really bothers especially the older generation anyway. It's just like they done been through it all, seen it all. It's like nothing really bothers them. So she was like, "What's going on, honey?" And I told her, and she was like, "Lay down." And she went to the kitchen and got a bag of ice and told me to lay down on the couch. And I remember her, she put the bag of ice on my chest. And I said, "Grandma, pray for me." And to this day, my cousins be joking with me all the time. They say pray for me is like a little inside joke. And they be like, "Grandma, pray for me," as a joke. But I told my grandmother, I was like, "Grandma, pray for me." Because I just thought I was going to die, that I was going home to be with God. And so she was like, "I always pray for you, baby." And she put the bag of ice on my chest. And I remember the bag of ice, it calmed me down, and I was back to normal, to my normal state. I felt good. Nothing was wrong with me after the bag of ice was on my chest, right? But then that was only for a brief moment. And then maybe, I don't know, a while later, say a half hour or hour later, I started to feel the same feeling again. It came back over me, getting this shortness of breath, feeling lightheaded, feeling my heart racing. I just felt like I was about to die. I felt like a heart attack. I felt like I couldn't breathe, And so what my grandmother did, she ended up calling my dad in Jacksonville, because they were working. And she was like, "Hey, your daughter's sick. Come get her." And before you know it, because Jacksonville is like, let's say 30 minutes driving distance from St. Augustine, Florida. Jacksonville is like north of St. Augustine, Florida. And so they rushed down there to get me from my grandmother's house. I remember they got there so fast. Like we always go to my grandmother's house, in St. Augustine to visit. And it seemed like it would take forever for us to get there. Even when we was headed back to Jacksonville, it seemed like it would always take us forever to get back home. But I remember this so clearly, like they got there in no time. Literally, like it felt like they got there like in 20 minutes, y'all. It was like they're quick, and they came to pick me up, took me back to our house, and I think that was it for that day. But the next day, because me and my sister, it was during the summer, my mother and father, they had to work. So my sister is 3 years older than me, and so they felt that it was safe to just leave us home, because back then that's how it happened. I know a lot of times parents nowadays, and the law and everything is just like, oh, you can't leave kids at home by themselves. But back then, hey, it was safe. We were safe. We had our rules, and mom and dad would say, "Hey, don't open the door for nobody. Keep the door locked, and just y'all know what to do. Be good, until we get back." And so it was gravy. But I remember that next day, it's like it came back. I started to feel those same symptoms of panic attack came over me. And I felt like I was about to die. I could not breathe. That's at least the sensation that I felt. And apparently I was breathing, because if I couldn't breathe, then I would be dead, right? Or brain dead. But no, apparently I was breathing, but that's just a sensation. Like it just felt like I couldn't breathe. My chest was hurting. There was pain in my chest. And I remember every time that I would experience a panic attack when I was a kid, my hands, my fists would do this. Like I had no control over the muscles, and I was trembling, and it was weird. And so my sister immediately called my mom. And if I can recall, my mom called my dad's family, a member from my dad's family, and they came. I think it was my aunt, his sister, came to pick me and my sister up and rushed me to the hospital. And then I think my mom ended up being at the hospital too. And I remember the doctor, this is so long ago, y'all. I'm 34 now, but I remember the doctor was like, they ran tests on me. They put these things, I don't know, what is it called? EKG. They was basically just monitoring they was monitoring my heart rate and just making sure everything was okay. They ran all these blood tests on me. And it was like, we can't find anything wrong with her. Like physically, she's healthy. That's what the doctor told my mom. Like, she's healthy. It's nothing wrong with her. Right? And he was, collecting information from my mom and from me and was like, what's been going on? I told him, I said, well, sometimes I think about my breathing. This is weird. Now that I'm saying it out loud. I was like, sometimes I think about my breathing and sometimes I like monitor like my heartbeat. And he was like, no, you're not supposed to be doing that, and obviously you're not, because breathing and, your heartbeat, that's something that's automatic. That's supposed to be subconscious, meaning you're not supposed to be thinking about it. That's not something that's supposed to be in your conscious awareness. Like, how many times your heart beat in a minute, or just focusing necessarily on your breathing. That's something that's supposed to be in your subconscious mind, not that you're even thinking about. But I told the doctor, I was like, sometimes I do that, and I actually used to do that kind of frequently. And this is when I was a child, like elementary school age, same age. And then he was like, no, that was his recommendation. He was like, don't do that. You're not supposed to do that. Go out there and have fun. Be a kid, but don't do that. Just go out there and play and enjoy yourself as a kid, but you don't be focusing on that, But that was just it. And that was a recommendation. He didn't give me any medication. He didn't screen for psychological illness or mental illness or anything like that. He just sent me and my mother on our way. And that was the end of that for that day. And y'all, I have to say this, like I said in the beginning of the video, it's just like, it's interesting to see how medical doctors, even though, yes, they get a little bit exposure to psychology, but a lot of them aren't really well versed in psychology. And I guess especially back then, this was in the 90s when that incident happened, it's like the doctors, apparently there was an oversight on their behalf because they didn't think to link it to, I guess, anything psychological. And I think it's a good thing. Thank God. Especially now that I'm in the field and now that I know how diagnosis and treatment works, especially for panic disorder, it's like, it's good that they didn't, because most likely there was a strong possibility I would have been prescribed medication. So thank God, because I don't necessarily agree with psychotropic medication. I mean, I agree with it as a last resort, but no, if you could survive and cope with life without it, that's my recommendation. And so he sent me on our way, went home, and after that happened, I remember, like, I just wasn't the same. I felt like I was about to have another panic attack. That was my biggest worry, around that time, was like, I'm about to have another panic attack. And I remember that I didn't know where these panic attacks come from. So I didn't know, like, what triggered it. So in my mind, I think I made certain associations, as the cause of my panic attack. So I actually, and this is weird, I actually thought that drinking water, how I came to this, I don't know. But in my little elementary schoolgirl mind, that's what I was thinking, that okay, maybe it's because I'm drinking water. So do you not know, like, for several weeks at a time, I was afraid to drink water. Agua, you guys. Agua. And it's funny because this is actually my favorite drink. I love, not Dasani necessarily, but water. I mean, that's all I drink, really, is water. But I remember at the time, I was so afraid. I wasn't drinking water. I was drinking milk and juice. And my sister would look at me like, girl, if you don't sit your behind down somewhere, because I would be so afraid. And I remember I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I need to overcome this fear. Because you can't survive without water. Your body needs water. There's no way you can escape not drinking water. And so I remember one day I tested myself, right? And it's interesting because it's like I was being a little scientist. And now that I think about it, this is actually what psychologists do to treat people who have phobias. They use systematic desensitization with the use of successive approximations and exposure to the fear stimulus to help people overcome phobias. And so what I did was I would take a little sip like this. I would just little sip of water, not even much, just a little taste on my tongue, and I would see what would happen. and nothing would happen, right? But even though I would do that, I was afraid. Like, just even the process of me doing that, my heart rate would go up, you know? But I think I was trying to train myself to overcome that fear at that time. And I was young. Nobody told me to do this. I would just do this naturally. It's like a natural instinct. And so I would take another sip, you know, like little sip, and I'm like, okay, nothing happened. And then over time, progressively, I was able to drink water. So I started back drinking water, and I was like, okay, I overcome that, you know, and I'm still alive. So apparently water is not going to kill me. But then there was another association that I had made. And I think, I don't even know if I made it consciously. I think it was something more subconsciously, where every time, y'all, I went to a gas station, you know, with my mother and my father, and I'm in a car and smell gas, it would happen. Like, it would trigger a panic attack. You know, I'm breathing fast, and I'm thinking I'm about to die, and like fear of losing control, and just this fear of death, y'all. To the point where I didn't want to go with every time, like, they had to go get gas. That's something you can't avoid, right? You have to put gas in your car, but every time they went to go get gas, like, I literally would hold my breath. I will hold my breath while at the gas station, so I don't have to take in those fumes, because I felt like the fumes would trigger a panic attack. That was just my experience growing up, y'all, with this disorder, panic disorder, and it was so unfortunate. But miraculously, you know, I had the ability to cope with these symptoms, and I outgrew them to a certain extent. So I'm going to tell you guys about a few more experiences that I had as an adult. But as a child, that's how I cope with it. It's like I told myself that, number one, there's no way I can function with this fear, you know, and I just overcame it. I just put myself to the test, you know. I pushed the limits, essentially. Like, I was afraid to drink water, and I would take little sips of water to the point where I was like, okay, nothing is happening. I'm not having a panic attack, and I'm fine. And I would just continue drinking more water. And then even with going to the gas station, I overcame that fear, because I would go, eventually I went to the gas station, I didn't hold my breath, and I didn't have a panic attack. So I realized, and like back then, I even realized that it was more psychological than anything. Like, it was just amazing to see how I overcame the disorder part. However, let me say this, because even though I overcame the disorder, I think, looking back now that I think about it, it's amazing, because all throughout grade school, I made like straight A. I was a straight A student, maybe a B here or there, but nothing less than that. And very high achieving student, you know, because my mom didn't play the radio, and I just always had a thirst to learn. You know, I always been fascinated about school and reading and learning, so never been a problem for me. But it's just amazing how I was able to just manage to get through that, even with this panic disorder that I had as a kid. But I outgrew it somewhat. But I have to say that I do remember, and I can count on one hand, probably less than 5 fingers, the number of like full-blown panic attacks that I've had. You know, most of them were when I was a child. I had like several when I was, you know, around that age in grade school and elementary school. And then I remember I had a friend, this guy friend. He was like interested in dating me, but I kind of really wasn't necessarily interested in him per se. And this is like my early 20s. But we were cool. Like, we were cool. And he had invited me over to his home. Really nice house. I mean, like, multi-million-dollar house. This is a beautiful house. His parents had a lot of money. And I remember the moment I stepped into his house, my heart began to race real fast. My heart began to beat fast. I felt dizzy. Like, I'm like, how in the hell am I dizzy? This beautiful house, and I walk in, and at the time, it's weird how our mind like will subconsciously make associations, right? So at the time, like, I felt like it was something about the house, you know, something about this house. And granted, I remember he was a very spiritual person. He was super, super, super spiritual. Like, I thought I was spiritual back then, but I think he had me beat when it came to spirituality. Like, very straight and narrow guy. I think he was even a virgin. Like, he was super, super spiritual. And his parents were very wealthy. And the moment I walked through the front door with him inside the house, I remember the dizziness came. I'm like, I literally was dizzy. So to the point where I was like, I had told him like I was tired. I need to sit down. I was like, I need to sit down, right? And so I ended up sitting down and regaining my composure. But my heart was beating fast, and I just knew it was about to happen. Like, I was having a panic attack, but it was like the onset of a panic attack. So being that I was a little bit older, and I had learned, this is after I had started college, so I had already learned what a panic attack was. I somewhat knew how to control it, and I knew that I needed to basically just remain calm, take control over my breathing, and just direct my attention elsewhere. That's actually one of the interventions that psychologists recommend. This is highly recommended in the literature, that this is how you can overcome a panic attack. This is how they are treated. They tell the client to just kind of direct their attention, refocus your attention. Don't focus so much on the autonomic processes that are happening, like your breathing and your heart rate, but focus on some outside object. Focus on a happy place, essentially, right? So I did that, and I remember automatically my body, my mind began to regain equilibrium. So I was fine. I was good at that point. That was that. But I remember at school, I was at Florida State University, and this had to be my junior, senior year. I can't remember. Junior, senior year. I know I was working in a research lab. And I remember it because I was with other students and the director of the research lab, and we were meeting in her office at this rectangular table. And I felt like it was so embarrassing, because that's the thing about having a panic attack. It's like, it's very real for the person having it. But for everybody else who's around witnessing it, they're like, what in the hell is going on? Like, this person, out of nowhere, you just start breathing fast, and you get this sense of terror that, over you, like terror is about to happen. You have this sense of derealization, depersonalization. You're just like, kind of like spaced out, like not knowing what's happening, And for people who are, like I said, on the outside, looking in, they're just like, what in the hell? So it's very embarrassing, because other people necessarily don't know what's happening. So I remember sitting in her lab, and lo and behold, it freaking happened. And I'm just like, how? Because we were discussing the research, her research, and we were discussing like our roles and our progress towards the project that we were working on for her research. And just out of nowhere, it happened. It came over me. That feeling came over me, and I immediately jumped up and I ran outside the door, because I'm just like, ain't no way I'm about to let them see me do this, right? And I'm like, if I'm about to die, I'm going to die in peace with nobody watching me. I don't want nobody over me, because I just thought I was about to die. And even still, even though I had a knowledge of what I was experiencing, even though let's say, okay, you know that you have panic attacks, right? Even though you know what it is, and even though the research says you're not going to die, no one dies from panic attacks. But when you're in it, it don't feel like that. When you're in it, it feels like you're about to die. So I wanted to just be outside the lab room. And I went out there, and I remember I had to sit down. I slouched, against the wall, and I sat down, and I think one of my lab mates came out to make sure I was okay. And I told her, I was like, no, I'm not feeling well, I think I'm having a panic attack, and I think she got me some water or something, and, was fanning me. And then my body just began to regain its equilibrium, and I was fine. And that reminds me, because I know a lot of you guys probably wondering, who are watching this, is like, where do panic attacks come from, right? And so while there isn't necessarily a definitive cause of panic attacks, the research says, and I can confirm this with my own personal experience and observation, that panic attacks are linked to childhood sexual or physical abuse. Now, I was not abused sexually as a child, but I have to say, and I know my mom, my family probably hate when I say this, but this is just me being honest. That yes, I was physically abused as a child, as I feel most African Americans were. But it's interesting because I had this conversation before in a vlog. You guys go back and watch that I talked about childhood beatings. And it's amazing to see the responses, how a lot of African Americans just don't look at that as abuse. Even to this day, you can do a poll online on social media, and people and parents will be like, no, kids deserve to get whooped. And they'll even talk about their own experience as a child getting beatings, and they'll be like, no, it was not abuse, that's just what's discipline. They look at it as discipline. But for me, I'm like, no, I have to keep it real, and I feel like it was abuse. Now I love my mother, and not to sit up here and point fingers at her and say, no, she was a bad mother. I feel like, no, she did what she knew best to do, which was beat my ass, because that's how her mom disciplined her growing up, But considering what she would whoop us with, first of all, we had to strip off our clothes, so that's number one. It wasn't no beatings happen with our clothes on. We had to take off our clothes down to our panties. Now, at the time, I hadn't experienced puberty yet, so no breasts, so pretty much bareback, topless, just only panties, and they had to lay across the bed, and she would get her choice weapons, and I do call them weapons, were extension cord, yes, cable cord, and leather belt. And she would tear our ass up. That shit would hurt. I still remember it to this day. I cannot forget it. I remember it so well. I remember the reasons I got the beatings and how it happened. I remember all of that, and it just stuck with me, So considering that even the research says that people who have panic disorder, there's a history of adverse childhood experiences, including sexual and physical abuse. I'm like, that pops out for me. That resonates with me, because I definitely went through that. And it wasn't just as a child. I mean, even through the age 16 years old, I was getting beatings. That's like part of the reason why I ran away from my mom's house. But that's a whole nother story. So y'all can go back and watch my childhood beatings video that I posted a while back. But yeah, and considering that, and just thinking about, what happens. I mean, when we would get our beatings, I always was reminded of slavery. I felt like a slave. Because even I remember, like, in school back then, we would watch Roots and all these slave videos. And I remember just watching the slave videos and seeing how the slaves got beat and whooped on their back and left with whelps. Like, I felt like I can identify very heavily with the slaves that I was watching who got beat by their slave masters, I'm like, shit, that's the kind of beatings I get, And there are whelps left for days, that we would have to cover up. I remember that, wearing turtlenecks, to school when it was hot, just to cover, like, it was real. And so, considering that, and when you think about what happens when a person is beaten, like, it makes a person hypersensitive, kind of similar to the idea of a woman who is abused. I say a woman because women typically are the ones who are victims of domestic abuse, but it's not to say men don't get abused. Men get abused as well, but women is kind of more frequently with women, I guess, maybe because, I don't know, it maybe happens more frequently, or we report it more frequently, or whatever. But it's kind of similar to that, where a person who has been physically abused or even sexually, they just have this hypersensitivity to stimuli in their environment. They're very, like, kind of physically hypersensitive, very much aware. It doesn't take much to maybe startle them, and sometimes they're very uncomfortable with people walking up behind them, things like that, right? Now, of course, by me being aware of my past experiences and going to therapy, it's like I've kind of resolved some of that. So I'm not like this freak of nature that is just afraid of, people around me. No. So that's why if you ever meet me face to face, you probably wouldn't be able to know. Like a lot of people really don't know unless they see my videos, will not necessarily be able to tell that I've had this kind of experience growing up. And a lot of times it's shocking to people when I talk about it, like, what? You don't even seem like that kind of person, because I just look normal. I blend in pretty well. But yeah, it makes you more hypersensitive. So tying that back to panic disorder, it kind of makes sense. Hi. Yeah. Oh, I don't have any cash. Sorry, I don't keep cash on me. Good luck though. But it kind of links. It reminds me. It links it. You can link that the hypersensitivity of physical abuse that a person experiences. It can definitely be linked to. It makes sense how it's linked to panic disorder or panic attacks. Because like the smallest thing can arouse you. It can arouse your physiological processes in your body. Those autonomic processes of breathing fast, your heart rate goes up. So it makes sense. So after that panic attack that I experienced, in my research lab at Florida State, that was, and I can say this with a good amount of confidence, my last full-blown panic attack that I experienced. And thank God, because I feel like I've learned to cope. It's just a matter of coping. Now, of course, the research says that you can't necessarily cure, there's no cure for panic disorder, or panic attacks per se, or whatever, that there's treatment for it, but not necessarily a cure. But I feel like I'm cured. I feel like being that I've learned to cope very well with anxiety, I'm cured. But who knows? Who knows, right? But I can say this before I end this video. I feel like jumping into a pool, y'all, because it's hot. But I can say this, that I remember that I like recently, since I've been out here in LA, I can recall a time where I came somewhat close to having a panic attack. I didn't have a full-blown panic attack now. Thank God. Like I said, it's been a while. That was the last time that I can remember, was back when I was at Florida State. And I graduated from Florida State back in 2006. So, yeah, that's been over 12 years since I've had a panic attack, like a full-blown panic attack. But I can recall, since I've been in LA, where I somewhat came close. And that's an interesting thing, because people who have panic attacks and are very self-aware, every time I go live, I get these notifications. But people who have panic attacks, or who have had a panic attack before, they're very much aware of when a panic attack is happening. It's something that you cannot ignore. You can't forget. You don't forget those kind of symptoms, right? Because it reminds you too much of dying or having a heart attack. You don't even know what a heart attack is, but you know what one is if you, if you have experienced a panic attack. And so I remember I was on the train out here in LA, maybe, I don't know, headed to work or school. I think it was work, to my practicum, to work with clients. And it was a lot of people on the train. And so I started to get like a shortness of breath. And then, of course, my heart rate started to go up, and I felt a little dizzy. And I was standing at the time. I was standing at the time on the train. Thanks, Stanley. But I was standing at the time on the train, and I started to feel dizziness. My heart rate started to go up, and I felt a shortness of breath. And I caught myself. And, I relaxed. And I didn't focus so much on my surroundings. And I redirected. I forget what the object was I decided to focus on, or what the idea, but I focused on something else. I redirected my thinking to something else. And I was able to regain my composure. And I think I took a seat because I know I was standing, but I think I had to sit down because I'm like, yeah, ain't no way I'm about to have no panic attack on this freaking train. It's like I haven't had a panic attack in over 12 years. So why do I need to start having panic attacks now? It ain't gonna happen. But that's the last time that I can recall actually experiencing somewhat close of a panic attack, but I haven't had one. And even to this day, I can admit, yes, I have anxiety. I mean, it's like, who doesn't have anxiety, you know? But to what extent? Because I think we all experience anxiety, but for some of us, anxiety is a little bit more heightened than others, and then for other, you know, is a little bit more uncontrolled. So it's all about being able to maintain control and regulate those symptoms associated with the anxiety, you know, that you're experiencing. And I think I've been pretty good at that because it's all about being self-aware and breathing. I can't emphasize this enough. And even the literature is out there. It's just common knowledge that the biggest thing, and I think that's the reason why meditation and yoga is so important. Like, this is a big wave now in our field. Breathing exercises, just breathing is so important. I think sometimes we forget to breathe. When we get anxious, we automatically just, we tighten up, we freeze up, and just forget to breathe. So that's my number one line of defense. When I can feel myself getting anxious, you know, or uneasy, I feel a sense of uneasiness, I just breathe, you know. And another thing is just getting fresh air, because sometimes if it's too crowded in a place, you know, it's like it's too many people. And granted, I love to be around people. That's why I love New York City. Like, ironically, I like New York City. I'm moving back, actually, you know, in a few years. But I love New York City. I like being around a lot of people. I like living in major cities where there's a lot of people, you know. So that's the kind of irony to this. It's like you would think, okay, for people who have anxiety when it comes to being in, I guess, closed spaces, you know, or with a lot of people, even like, for example, riding the subway. So a lot of people on New York City subway. And I'm realizing sometimes, depending on the time that I get on the train out here in LA, it can be kind of like a lot of people there. But I'm good. You know, I haven't experienced like uncontrollable anxiety. You know, I have experienced anxiety, but not to the point where it's like out of control and I feel like I'm about to die and I feel like I'm losing control. Thank God, you know, because it's a really scary experience. And I think I make, I guess, like an unwritten promise to myself that, you know, I just always have to make sure that I don't let myself get too worked up. You know, that's the key. And just to breathe, to meditate, to breathe. You know, I think I saw somewhere in the literature where it says that you just close your eyes, you know, because the stimuli in your environment may trigger it, you know. But I wanted to speak to the whole point about the differentiation between anxiety attacks and panic attacks, because the literature makes a point to distinguish the two. And I understand why, because definitely, like, in our field, labels are important. A lot of people don't like to be labeled, you know, they're like, do away with the labels, but they're important because they help clinicians, scientists to be able to not only predict behavior, but to control it. And that's pretty much two of the main goals of psychology. The four main goals, I think, include predict, control, describe, and explain. But it's really important for clinicians to be able to predict behavior, and not only that, but to know how to control it. And so I can see why they make that delineation between panic attacks and anxiety attacks, with the underlining characteristic being a known stressor involved, having a known precursor to the attack. So again, like I said at the beginning of this video, with panic attacks, presumably there's no known precursor. There's no known stressor, just like it happens out of the blue. Like, for example, when I was telling you about the panic attack I had when I was in a research lab, it's like there's nothing that could have triggered that. I wasn't anxious. There was nothing to be anxious about. You know, I was very familiar with working with my lab mates and my supervisor, you know, the director of the lab. Like, we all knew each other, you know, so there's no reason for me to feel anxious or worried about anything, you know. There was nothing happening at the time in my life where I felt like there's this impending doom or terror, for me to even experience that. It just literally, it felt like it happened out of nowhere. So that is pretty much the difference and the underlying characteristic between with panic attack. Is assumed that there's no precursor, there's no trigger, there's no known stressor for the panic attack. It just happens. Whereas the with an anxiety attack, there is a known stressor, and the good thing about knowing the precursor or the stressor that comes before the anxiety attack is that if you know, for example, you have anxiety when you're around a large group of people, that's something that can be regular. That's something that can be controlled. You can predict that, number one, and you can control. You can go in knowing that, okay, there's going to be a lot of people, so there's certain strategies and tactics that you can implement to prevent the onset of an anxiety attack, right? And that goes for anything that a person may have a predisposition of fear to. It can be animals. I remember at one time, I actually, believe it or not, I actually used to be scared shitless of dogs. Like, I was scared of dogs. But I remember I had a friend when I was in graduate school who had dogs, and I would go visit his house and hang out with him. And like over time, it worked like magic. The whole thing about exposure therapy and desensitization, systematic desensitization through the process of successive approximations is like that. It works like magic, y'all. It really does, because it started off with me kind of just going to his house and not even interacting with the animals at all, just being in the same room, and of course there was some fear. And then I progressed from that to actually, once I was actually around these were pit bulls, big ass pit bulls. But once I was around the pit bulls, it's like I developed a little bit more confidence to go up and to pet one of the pit bulls. Still afraid, but, I tested my fear and was able to go up to the pit bull and pet it. He was in a cage, actually, not loose now, in the cage, petting it. And so then I'm like, okay, I survived that, right? So it came a point where he was outside, the dogs were outside the cage, and I would come to visit. Usually I would make him lock the dogs up, have the dogs in the cage, but, it got to a point where he didn't have to have his dogs locked up. They were able to roam around freely, and I was fine, And then it got to the point where I guess I had developed so much confidence and comfortability around dogs that I actually got my own pit bull, because I literally became desensitized to the fear of being around a pit bull. So it works like magic, and it's a very effective treatment that psychologists use in treating phobias, whether it's, snakes that people are afraid of, or social interaction that people have fear of, or crossing a bridge. I actually had an old roommate in college who was afraid she never had been across a bridge. This was like kind of weird, like who hasn't crossed a bridge, but she didn't have that experience, and she was just so afraid. But for example, like for her, a therapist would actually use successive approximations through desensitization to get a person more comfortable to be able to cross that bridge. It may start with just showing them a picture of a bridge, and measure their level of anxiety and see how they're able to regulate their feelings of anxiety. And then it may get to the point where just going to visit a bridge. You're not going to cross it, but just going to visit it and being able to regulate those feelings of anxiety and that approximation. And then it just gets increase the level of exposure to the point where a person's actually right there in the midst of the phobia, the thing that they're afraid of. They're just right there, smack there in the middle of them. Before you know it, a person successfully is able to do it, to face that fear. So it's amazing, I think, just the level of what they call it, plasticity our brain has, but just a level of flexibility that the mind has to be able to overcome certain mental illnesses, so to speak, or phobias or fears, and I can speak definitely from my own personal experience as I have in this video that it's just amazing because I go from a child who literally had panic disorder, because I was afraid that I would experience another panic attack. That is like the main determining factor of panic disorder, not just that you have a panic attack, but you actually fear that you're going to have another panic attack. So I went from a child that had this disorder, this panic disorder, to a person who, yes, as an adult, I experienced kind of panic attacks here and there, to like today, I'm not thinking about no panic attacks. Like that doesn't even cross my mind, and even when I do feel a sense of anxiety, which it comes, I mean, anxiety happens, even when it comes to public speaking, because although I do my videos on YouTube, sometimes I get anxiety when it comes to speaking in front of people. Not all the time. I know my classmates are like, girl, you are not afraid to speak, because I speak out pretty frequently in class, and I feel like that's just me getting my practice. Like the more you do it, the better you get at it. So now I think I'm a pro when it comes to seminars and lectures and discussions, at the academic level, just being able to speak out. I don't have anxiety when it comes to that, but I think when it comes to, let's say, a large group, let's say if I had to deliver the speech for my graduation, for example, I don't know. I would say I can do it, and I would rise to the plate, because I love challenges. That's the odd thing about me. I don't mind overcoming my fears and my anxiety. I think that's the best way to cope. You just got to face it. And so if, let's say, I was asked to speak at a graduation, or to speak publicly, I would rise to the plate. I definitely will rise to the occasion, but I don't mean that I won't have anxiety. I feel like it will be a test and a challenge for me to be able to overcome that. And I think that over the years, I've had many different experiences where I've been afforded the opportunity to work through my fear. Look at this little birdie. Look at this little birdie coming to say hey to me. Hi. Hey, cutie birdie. A good little cutie birdie. And even at my last prac, interesting enough, with group therapy is usually with, let's say, 9 to 10 patients. It usually isn't that many. When I was doing group therapy in Queens, New York, working with a group of adults who were court ordered for substance abuse treatment and domestic violence, I had a group. Sometimes it would be 10 to 15 clients in that group, and I winged it. I did it like I was a pro. But my last practicum actually had a group of like 30 clients. Y'all. That's a lot of people in one group. And so being that the group size was so big, we actually used a microphone. My supervisor encouraged us to use a microphone. I'm just like, it kind of made me a little bit nervous. I'm like, I'm not really kind of used to speaking with a microphone, right? But I rose to the challenge. I'm like, I ain't never scared. Like, I ain't never scared. So I rise to the plate, I feel like, God done put not one bone of fear in my body, right? So, in a negative way anyway, I was like, no, I'm not being afraid. So I rose to the plate and I was like, okay. And even though I said okay, I had some nervousness. There was some anxiety that I was experiencing, but I managed it. I feel like the best way to overcome anxiety is just to face it, man. Just to do it. Put yourself in there. And I did it. I was just like, okay, I'm not used to using a mic in front of a large group of people, but hey, what the heck, I'm just do it, like Nike says, just do it. And I did it. And over time, I had been there at my last prac for an entire year. And by the end of the year at my prac, y'all, like, that's, I think, the reason why I broke down in tears, because he gave me such positive feedback. And he was talking about how he's seen my growth, over the months. And he's seen, where at first, I did have some reluctance, a little bit of, anxiety surrounding getting up there in front of a large group of people, you know, and doing this therapeutic group. But over time, it was just like, hey, it's like I was made for the mic. So that's it, y'all. Like, feel free to share your comments, questions if you have any, you know, in on below on this video, you know, concerning, you know, my experience with panic attacks. But I definitely feel like I've overcome it, you know, because I move and think 2 steps ahead of the game, right? So you, like I said, the whole point of one of the goals of psychology is to predict behavior. And you can predict it, you can control it. I'm always kind of thinking about the future somewhat, so to speak. So if I feel like, okay, I'm about to approach an anxiety provoking encounter or experience, then I prepare myself for that, you know. And hey, it is what it is. And I look at this bottle of water as like a testimony, because it's like at one point as a child, I was sitting here afraid to drink water, thinking I was about to die. But look, I can sit here and drink water and so good, y'all. I feel so enlivened, so motivated. I just feel great. I feel great, and that's all I have for you guys in this vlog. Share this vlog, you guys. You guys never know who this video can help. So I encourage you guys to share it. And if you want to share your own personal experience, you know, if you feel comfortable enough, you don't have to. Now, not forcing nobody to sit up here and tell your personal business, but if you so feel motivated to share your own personal experience with anxiety disorders, with panic disorder, with whatever mental illness, you know, and I kind of hate that, like, illness, you know, like something, so much stigma surrounding mental illness, but I feel like that's the reason why I'm, I guess, transparent about my own personal experiences, you know, with things, because that's how we are able to lessen the stigma and to make it so that more people feel comfortable talking about it. And once more people feel comfortable opening up about it and talking about it, then we learn more about it, you know, and we don't have to just go around and call people crazy, but we can actually put a conceptualization on what's happening, you know, something that makes sense as opposed to saying, oh, that person is just crazy. It's like, no, not crazy. Very smart, very wise, very well educated. And with that being said, I'm about to go and continue to enjoy the rest of my day. Out here is so beautiful, y'all. I'm going to show y'all my view. This is like nice waterfall over there. Just a beautiful day out here in LA. But hey, I'm about to go, and I'm gonna catch you guys in the next one. Love you guys. Bye.